All right, everyone. Welcome to a Saturday edition of Crypto with English. And today's theme is Polygon. And we have a very, very special guest from Polygon. We have Soufia Trabelsi. She's the Web3 gaming lead at Polygon Technology, as many of you know as Matic. And she's coming on today to really discuss Web3 gaming and kind of everything that surrounds and entails that. And for many of you who are already in this space, it is abundantly apparent that Polygon technology may end up being one of the major successors to Ethereum and essentially the Ethereum-based dApp ecosystem that we've all really benefited and enjoyed over the past few years. So kind of a brief overview of Polygon, and then we're going to get into the weeds about Web3 gaming on Polygon. So Polygon is really this incredible multi-chain ecosystem, which many call the Internet of Blockchain, or Internet of Blockchains rather, and it uses a proof of stake blockchain architecture, and this is combined with the Plasma framework. So there is some serious, respectable technology and power behind this. And just to give you an idea, so if you have a standard blockchain, and if you're going to build side chains to this, you're kind of scaling your dApp, your platform up. So Matic, Polygon can process 65,000 transactions per second with less than a 2-second block confirmation. This is effectively a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. If this was a racetrack and we're going to call certain blockchains different cars, this is a genuine supercar, race car, to say the least. So Soufia, thank you very much for coming on to the show today. I'm very excited for this episode, to say the very least.
I'm super excited as well, and thank you for the invite, and thank you for the opportunity to sort of get to discuss all these, exciting things with you. And actually, I wanted to touch on a little point.
Sure.
Our goal, I think, is it's not to, necessarily become the successor of Ethereum. We are built on Ethereum, and
Right.
Ethereum, is the mothership of all blockchains. And just sort of like a shout out moment for Ethereum here.
Right.
I mean, this is what kind of made everything possible, like through their ERC standards. So we're built on top of that. So like we're the layer 2 solution, and like
Right.
like we can obviously get into this, but I mean, we're super excited to just, be able to accommodate that and to just accommodate all these wonderful projects that are coming in and, just be a part of that creators economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the little preamble there was in no way, shape, or form to dismiss Ethereum, by any stretch of the imagination. I think it was more of kind of a testament to I think Polygon's potential and capability. So, starting off the episode, how did you find your way into Polygon, and especially this role
Yeah.
in Web3 gaming?
So a little prelude. I was an aerospace engineer. I was an aerospace engineer for probably like one day. I graduated from aerospace engineering. That was sort of
Wow.
like my goal. Um, or like around year 3 or 4, I think we kind of like discussed this, but I'm happy to sort of. We all have that crazy kind of like crypto friend. Like I'm talking circa
Right.
2018, and then, you know, I never, really understood what he was talking about, but like he was super excited about it. And then one day I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go and like figure what this is all about. And yeah, and then I was just as
Right.
crazy as he was after that. Um, I was more into like the tech side of like aerospace, so like that kind of pushed me to go more on the dev side of crypto. So I
Right.
started out as a Solidity developer, as a freelancer while I was still in uni. The
So
really
you were
cool
building
thing
smart
about that,
contracts effectively on like an EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine at
trying
first, I would
to,
imagine.
trying
Okay,
to,
got
yeah.
it.
I was definitely trying to. I think that's how it started because like there was no course on Solidity per se. I mean, even the content online, isn't as romanticized as it is today, where it's
Right,
kind of like very easily digestible. It's kind of like made nice and clean for everyone to understand. But like
right,
at the time, it was, and like when I say at the time, it wasn't really that long like ago, but certainly, less romanticized in the sense where it's like, here's the protocol, here's the code base. I did most of the things from my terminal. Even like when they came out with the ERC standard for NFTs, I started dabbling with that like through my terminal. This was kind of like my connection to Web3, and I'm really happy that this was the case, because it really kind of pushed me to like directly kind of mesh with the protocols without essentially having to read all about it, but like have a first-hand kind of
Right.
approach, like a very proactive approach. And then once the material became more abundant, it just looked a little bit easier for me to use. So yeah, I started as a freelancer, and as a Solidity developer. Continued that, and then I worked with an IDO platform, more of an IGO platform, where we did sort of like gaming. So IDO specifically for games, and then that kind of translated into incubating games through that interaction that I had with them, and really getting to have more of a detailed understanding of the gaming side of
Wow.
Web3, especially very early on. I think when I joined, like it was around like at the time where like Web3 gaming was kind of becoming like a buzzword.
Right.
So just to be like a part of like that momentum, and discover the space in real time. And yeah, and then I mean, obviously it's Polygon, so I'm not gonna get into like, I mean, everyone knows that, it's like a major player in the
Sure.
space, and they started Polygon Studios, which is the sort of like the creative arm of Polygon to essentially enable this ecosystem to be supported, beyond investment, but also resources that are there to help the projects, because it's not enough to just have an investment. It's like, how do you use that efficiently in order to create a really good project? So I think that's sort of like the core of Polygon Studios, and that's kind of was like, okay, I want to be a part of that. And
Wow.
yeah, I applied, and some way somehow I got in. So
That's great. And could you describe what Web3 gaming is? There's a lot of conceptions and perhaps misconceptions as far as what that entails. Some people have, some idea of like the metaverse and, things like the Central Land. You create an avatar and essentially you kind of interact with a parallel digital world as you would, akin to reality. So could you describe what Web3 gaming is?
yeah, I mean, first of all, it's gaming. There's on the visual sort of like front of what gaming means, it is still gaming. I think for me, Web3 gaming is sort of like that layer that runs on top of gaming, and that's like the game changer, which is, for example, ownership.
Right.
So I'll talk about this. There's actually 3 points, and I'll address them all kind of like directly.
Excellent.
There's like that Web3 layer of ownership, actually getting to own the assets in your game. So I mean, it
Very
doesn't sound
nice.
like a lot, but like imagine playing Monopoly and actually getting to cash in your Monopoly money. Like that's kind of like the example that I always give,
All right.
as opposed to like those assets just being the game's assets. And people
Right.
are really happy to like gain assets like when they're playing, because they've worked hard for it, or like they had to do all these challenges, but now it's like you actually get to own it. And and there is a seller's economy for that as well. So if you ever do want to sell it at some point, that's always available. So I mean, I think ownership is like, we don't give it enough credit, but it is a very powerful difference. The
Right.
other like aspect that I think really sort of speaks to gamers is this idea that you get rewarded for your gaming skills. There's a lot of folks
Right.
out there that spend many hours playing, and there's always like this notion of like you're kind of wasting your time, but like right now you're not, because you're actually getting
Right.
rewarded for that time, and even more so getting rewarded for having certain skills that allow you to reach certain levels in the game. And I think that kind of incentivizes people to have more of like a respect, like when they're playing Web3 gaming. And I think it's going to be interesting to sort of see how that pans out in the future. But certainly, I think those are the two main points of like Web3 gaming, from kind of like a cultural and like I don't want to get too into the tech. I mean, I'm happy to get in more like on the tech side, but
Of
I
course.
think from just a gamer's perspective, I think those would be like the two big differences.
Yeah, and by the way,
To
there's
give
a
it the
lot
credit.
of right. There's a lot of substance and direction we can go to regarding gaming. So just to add maybe a layer of, context, with an example. So let's say, for example, as far as Web3 gaming, if I am playing some sort of like open world adventure game, and let's say I, as the player, I find a special item, whether it's like some sort of magical sword or an axe or like a special piece of armor or like a skin, like an outfit, so to say, in let's say a Web3 scenario, Web3 game, I actually own that as essentially a piece of property. And if I want to, I can actually go ahead and sell this in a transaction to probably another player out there who would want to, spend whether it's like Ethereum or some sort of, comparable, cryptocurrency if they wanted, let's say, that item for myself, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, the seller's economy is really powerful in the sense where, like, you get to actually sell something that you worked hard to achieve, because, like, let's say you want that asset in the game and you don't necessarily want to continue playing that game, or you're kind of happy where you are right now, where you need, for whatever reason, like, the point is that this is kind of an option that people have, and like, kind of just touching on the secondary market, by far is OpenSea, and the only
Right,
other sort of like big blockchain that's supported beyond Ethereum on OpenSea is Polygon. And
right.
that's, I think that's a huge sort of like sign of confidence,
Yeah,
like a, for Polygon. But essentially for anyone that, wants to interact with that blockchain, this is the biggest, secondary economy, or sorry, secondary marketplace for that. Um,
right.
so it's cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to play to earn, and I think this has been really taking up a lot of visibility, especially over the past year. So now we're essentially living in a world. Let's say if, for example, I'm a gamer, I can literally be on, let's say, a Web3 base game, and I can essentially be earning like an income based on certain activities or certain
Yep.
tasks I do in that game. And this can go into my wallet, this can go into like a MetaMask or anything like that. Correct?
Yeah, this is correct. I mean, you could play an infinite amount of games, and there's 10,000 ways to make income from those games. And
Right.
just a little thought for the sort of, actually, the biggest play to earn locations, are in Southeast Asia. So, for example, you have the Philippines that are by far dominating the game. You have Indonesia, India. So
Right.
these countries, like, not to get it too much into like politics or whatnot, or like the sort of economic situation, but it allows people to have a stream of income that they could just do from the comfort of their home, for having
Right.
skills. But even more so, I just wanted to get into this concept as well, which is really, really popular right now, which is free to play in Web3 gaming. um, and I think this is kind of like the biggest sign of confidence that um, Web3 games are getting better, because there was this concept of, I mean, it is a concept until now. It's play to earn, and
Right.
it's it's kind of like a very unique term, because it kind of means that you're playing to earn. Like, you're not necessarily playing because the game's cool or you like what you're seeing, or
Okay, I
it's
see.
you're playing just for that purpose. And now there's this concept of play and earn, which is that you're playing because you actually like the game and you're earning. So the incentive is, the game itself and the earning aspect. And a lot more games right now are going for the free to play kind of mechanism. And I think this is like the ultimate signs that the quality of Web3 games, is getting up to par. I think there was always this notion that like Web3 games, like they're, from a visual standpoint, are not really competitive with Web2 gaming. And I think with free to
Sure.
play, it's sort of like changing that perception, that where there's people that actually play because, the game is nice and cool enough to play. So I
Right.
think that's kind of like a shift that we're seeing. And I think it's going to be like one of the themes for gaming in 2022. And I'm very curious to see like how that's going to play.
Absolutely. And by the way, I really appreciate you making that distinction. Play and earn and play to earn. And I think they both have very different definitions. And now, especially recently, I've seen both of those terms essentially thrown about. So play and earn really implies almost like a genuine enjoyment and you could say interest in the game. So essentially, earning that income is kind of an additional perk to that experience. And play to earn almost implies like a job or a task or something along those lines. And you know, because now we have both of those definitions now, it is a great distinction and it provides a lot of clarity now, because people would actually ask me, whether through DM or email, like, Adam, what exactly is, play to earn? Is this kind of like, is it kind of like a job? Is it kind of, like, what is this exactly? So recently with play and earn, that really distinguishes the subject matter where people are actually playing these games for enjoyment, but the additional perk and benefit is deriving essentially an income in many ways, from that experience. So I definitely appreciate you, throwing that terminology out there. I have a question, too. And you were speaking of, certain areas of the world that are particularly into this. And I think one of the main themes of, blockchain technology and cryptocurrency is kind of the value to like unbanked populations across the world. So, this could be virtually anywhere. By the way, even in the United States, where there's areas that don't have great access to banking, playing Web3 games could essentially be a feasible alternative for people who, let's say, can't have the most convenient access to banks, but you still need an income to survive and live. You can essentially play games, occupy your time and derive, essentially crypto tokens from that experience. So it's almost like it's almost gamifying a solution for a really, really important problem.
I mean, like what's great is that it is an option, right?
Yeah,
And depending on how much time and how many hours a day you want to allocate to like Web3 gaming, so it really depends on the player and his
right.
skills. Obviously, if you unlock different levels, that's always great. But I mean, it's definitely a new avenue that didn't exist before. Like this
Yeah,
notion that you're a gamer. It's like, what's your job? I'm a gamer,
right,
where, like beyond being, like a professional gamer, where obviously, they do get, revenue from playing professionally, like whether that's streaming or in competitions, but just like for the regular folks that are not
right.
necessarily professionals or amateurs, but, get to have that as an option for extra income, is certainly something that wasn't possible before.
Yeah, and you know what I think is great about this too? Essentially gaming and earning money from it isn't an exclusive type of activity anymore. I used to watch on YouTube like these various, I guess you could say, gaming and video game competitions across the world, and they had like, um, you know, high value prizes like 25,000, 50,000, in some case 100,000, and it seemed like that was really kind of a stratosphere or an arena for hyper professional gamers with really beyond comprehensible skill. Like I would just watch this on YouTube, like, wow, like these guys play video games, and this guy just won $100,000 from it. This girl just won like $125,000 from this. I'm like, this is incredible. And now with Web3, you can actually just start day one today on your desktop or your laptop and
Yep.
go right from there, and kind of almost slowly and progressively start building like a salary or an income from that rather.
I mean, you could definitely think about it like that, but it's interesting because you mentioned streaming, and I think the 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 signal of success for a game is when people go on Twitch and YouTube and start playing the game, and they kind
Right,
of build a community around that, and beyond just playing the game as well, like watching other players, kind of comparing their skill sets or whatnot.
right,
But this is definitely like sort of like the litmus test to sort of see, okay, this is kind of, I mean, if you look at Fortnite on Twitch, I mean, it's absolutely insane, but
right,
we don't see a lot of Web3 gaming there as of yet.
right,
And I think kind of like the ultimate signal that, okay, this is kind of becoming a lot more mainstream and there's more people that are into it. I think beyond, how many players do you have? Like, do you actually have players that are streaming your game? And we
right,
have been hearing this with like some of the projects as well, like, streaming. Definitely like not in a superficial sense where it's like you're paying people to stream, but more so like having that community around the game where people are incentivized just from the quality of the game.
right.
So now that we have free to play, so the quality is almost there, and I think kind of like the next step is to start seeing Web3 gaming, on major streaming channels,
Right.
hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And I'm very excited and I'm very curious to see how this will end up developing and progressing and how it's going to transform just gaming, altogether. And another element that's very, very important to gaming, are NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And
Yeah.
as we all know, users can mint NFTs using Polygon. And as we're seeing more and more with gaming, NFTs have a role in essentially this microeconomy or the secondary market. Can you get into the weeds about NFTs and kind of the element and the role they'll be playing with Web3 gaming?
Well, essentially, the NFTs are more like the sort of digital assets that you get to have, for playing a game. Sometimes you need to purchase, in-game assets in order to play the
Right,
game, or it can be a reward for having, achieved, certain challenges in the game.
right,
So in the aspect of like NFTs, from I think a lot of people when they think of NFTs, it's always like that speculation, like investor type approach where,
right.
the NFT is gonna like 30x or
Sure,
so
100x or
I mean,
which, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Um, and I know like there's a lot of people that kind of look at, like whatever NFT it is, like how does this thing, how did this thing 100x? Like what was the incentive behind that? And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier as well. But I think it's going to be a lot harder in the sense where like there is this kind of accountability to it, and it is getting
Right,
saturated to the point where like if you are looking for that kind of project, there needs to be a utility behind that NFT beyond just being a really nice
right,
image. I mean, so the emphasis on sort of having a value driven project that actually does have utility, beyond just being a beautiful picture is going to become a lot
right,
more prominent, just because there's also a lot more players in the space right now, that
right,
are actually working on creating value driven,
right.
NFT projects beyond just gaming as well. So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting, and actually just like working with the projects, sort of like it is a big kind of theme, which is that like I don't want to have another NFT collection.
Right.
So what does that
Yeah.
exactly mean? It's like I don't want to have a bunch of JPEGs. It's like how do I do this in such a way where it's like true to my brand and kind of like talks to my
Right.
audience, and it's going to get the interest of the community in a way where it's like, okay, I see why I should buy this, beyond if I buy this there's sort of this notion that it's gonna 100x for no particular like reason.
Right.
So
Right.
and I do appreciate the sort of like more value driven mindset, because I think this is what's going to last. It's value. If you have something that doesn't have value, then it's going to be hard to justify that long term, and to keep your community interested, and loyal to the project.
Right. And that brings up a very good point, especially as it comes to NFTs. So my feeling is as time goes on and more people become involved in NFTs and especially Web3 gaming, where NFTs are going to be part of transactions in that space. I guess my concern would be, well, first of all, I think, customers and users are going to be more discerning and more particular as time goes on. But kind of touching upon what you said, is there going to be a risk that there's going to be some sort of dilution in like NFTs and their value? So we're talking about, oh, is this just going to be another collection? I think there might be a risk where people might just end up producing more and more of the same and like kind of like what you said without that additional value outside of like a nice aesthetic. So if that ends up becoming the case, that might really end up devaluing a lot of NFTs, over time, right?
I think this is kind of where gaming comes in as like the knight and the shiny white horse, because
Right.
like with NFTs, in gaming, so in-game assets, there is that inherent like utility for them, which is that you get to actually play them in the game.
Right.
So this is kind of like
Yes.
giving another dimension to NFTs, that previously didn't exist like before gaming. I mean, there
Right.
are NFT projects where it's like they kind of promise, certain like experiences by owning that NFT, like you get to have access to X, Y, or Z. But I think with in-game assets, the utility is pretty evident. It's that you can play them in the game. And I think long term as well, when you kind of get into sort of like interoperable blockchains, getting to use those assets in like different games and whatnot, I think that's just gonna drive the utility even further. So there, yeah. So I think kind of like the the next dimension to NFTs is NFTs with utility, and then the one after that, I mean, we just have to wait and see what that translates to. But I think there's sort of like this nice kind of approach, which is that like let's give something value because it actually has value, as
Right.
opposed to
Right.
can't really
Well,
explain it kind of thing.
so let's say going off your example there, you mentioned, let's say, like the white knight on a horse, with the lance and the armor. So let's say in a normal setting, or let's say an average setting in NFTs, I buy this white knight hero, so to say, this white armored knight hero as an NFT picture. That's just merely an aesthetic in of itself. That's it. But let's say if that is integrated into a gaming experience, I buy that. Let's say that knight in shining armor with the white armor on top of the horse in a gaming setting. I can, let's say, use that knight's armor and weapons, or there's some sort of additional power up to, let's say, the character that I'm using, in that game, for instance.
That's a really, really good analogy. So like imagine, let's take like that horse on the white knight, and like,
Right.
now there's a horse on a sorry, a horse on a knight. Wow. A knight on a yellow horse and a knight on a blue horse, and each
Right.
color kind of represents different, like a different utility in that game, or like each one
Right.
has a certain rarity. And if we go on OpenSea, like most collections, are kind of like classified in value through rarity. So like the rarer the item,
Right.
obviously the cost there increases. But like in a game, for example, if we were to have that, and then each kind of horse represented a certain like part of the game, or like a certain utility in the game, then that would give a more meaningful value, when speculating on that digital asset.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like, you could have these impressive collections, these gamified collections of NFTs. So like taking, like you said, taking the white knight or the white armored knight, and let's say it's a yellow horse or a black horse or a blue horse or a purple horse. There could be very distinguishing attributes and characteristics, and probably even set, I guess you could say, supply, for, I guess you could say, of these items in each of these collections. So I would imagine, if, let's say, later on the player, let's say if they're not using this particular game anymore, and they're not really utilizing this knight on a horseback collection, they could in turn just go ahead and just sell this in this secondary, in this really the secondary market, this little microeconomy, to somebody else. They can take a profit from that, and they can kind of just move on with their lives and do something else, and maybe do another type of Web3 type game to occupy their time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really kind of cool about all this is that this exists, right? Like these avenues do exist right now. So it is
Right.
very kind of like early days for the space, but the fact that all these avenues are there for whenever you're ready to sell, or if you don't want to sell, or if you, I mean, there's a lot of options on OpenSea, but like even just like leaving it there and letting people, give you offers for that horse, like the first person might come in, with X amount, then the next person is with X amount, and like maybe the game becomes very popular like within a year, and
Right.
then all of a sudden like the value just increases. But there is an actual sort of reason as to why that value increases, because there's more people that are playing that game. The horse, is a very rare breed, and then so this kind of
Right.
justifies, like when you're kind of explaining to your friend like why did you buy it for X amount, you can kind of say, well, the game just went crazy, and this is one of the rarest breeds, as opposed to like kind of like justifying an image where it's kind of like, well, it's super pretty and I'm not sure why, but so there
Right.
it becomes a lot more, realistic to sort of like justify why something costs X amount.
Right. And and by the way, stop me if I'm going too outside the box here. So, because let's say this is the case with Web3 gaming, if let's say we have this knight on horseback, and we're just talking about the black horses. So we can have a black horse with a red mane. We can have a black horse with a white mane. We can have a black horse with a blue mane. And there could essentially be separate characteristics, A, to the horse as a whole, and then B, to let's say the color of their mane or the color of their tail. And from there
Yeah,
on and so on, right?
I mean, and like in terms of in-game mechanics, these sort of features would have a meaning in that game. So if he
Right.
was, a black horse with like yellow hair, then maybe, he was able to fly in that game, and he was the only one of the three horses that could fly in that game. And because of that, there is more of an incentive to have that sort of like functionality in that horse. So,
Right.
I mean, if you're like kind of playing that game and then you want to change the color of his hair, like there has to be a certain reason for it, and that reason
Right.
is usually an advantage that gives you more of an advantage, obviously, like in that game.
Wow, that's incredible. And it seems like to me, using Matic, there isn't a whole lot of, let's say, overhead or really cost or even like burden. If let's say I want to start creating a decentralized adapt or let's say a game using Polygon in this essentially this Web3 type of world, like I don't have to be a studio per se to create a game anymore. I as an individual can now go and use this, correct?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of great things about using Matic. So obviously when you're kind of playing a game, there is that sort of feature, there's that problem of like latency where like it might not be the fastest. And I think in terms of, like Web2 tech, we've kind of like solved that issue where you can be playing, like if it's a PvP game, you can be playing with players all over the world, and you
Right.
wouldn't have that problem, like with latency. So that's been solved, right? But like now, like in terms of Web3 gaming specifically, and which is very unique about Web3 gaming, is that every action is a transaction. So
Right.
anything that you kind of buy in the game, any action that's done in a specific way where it results in a transaction. So you need to be on a network that is, first of all, fast enough so that like
Right.
you're not kind of getting tired from waiting too long for that transaction to go through. And I
Indeed.
think with Matic, that's not a problem at all. But the other aspect of that is that, so because it's a transaction, there's a transaction fee. And so if you're on a network that is, super fast, and the transaction fees, are super affordable, I mean, it kind of fluctuates, but, it's by far the most affordable network out there. I think that's what's going to
Right.
result in developers kind of being incentivized to say, well, this is a cool solution, like beyond it being Polygon and beyond the ecosystem, for the in-game mechanics and from a user perspective. You don't want them waiting too long for transactions to happen, and you don't want that to be a strain on their wallet either, like when they're kind
Right.
of like really heavy on the game, and then you don't want
Sure.
to look at your wallet and see like, hey, I just spent, like $100 on gas fees today just by playing
Right.
this game. But it's like more so, I'm on a network where I can play as long as I want, and I wouldn't have to have that as sort of like a barrier to me, playing this game. So this is maybe like one of the really cool things about Matic that kind of incentivizes the developers to pick that as a blockchain.
Yeah.
I mean, the future is multi-chain,
Sure.
um, any blockchain, but so like kind of like the reason as to why there's always sort of like a justification for that.
Right. So, given how generous Matic is to the user's wallet, it seems like the only thing that can limit you is maybe your imagination and maybe your coding skill at that moment when creating a game. Would it be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of getting to a point where, a lot of things are possible with Web3, and, like just the way that it has sort of like accommodated, like developers, like there is an incentive for, Web2 games kind of like starting to look into Web3 games, and kind of this kind of ties with like the core of like Polygon Studios, is to essentially,
Right.
as the creative arm of Polygon, to sort of enable this economy within the Polygon ecosystem, which is
Right.
that, beyond investment, it's like, how can we help them, with all the resources in order to make this a successful project
Right.
on Polygon? And there are projects that come in, and it's like they're not necessarily just on Polygon, but I think the aim of Polygon Studios is really like if it's kind of like a high profile project that comes in and like they're not really too sure like about X, Y, or Z, like we can essentially be there for them to support that transition. Um, and you know, for games that are sort of like the indie developers in their garage, like they'll find that you know using the developer tools for Polygon is by far like one of the easiest. And for games that are already on like Ethereum, just making that transition to Polygon as a layer two is ridiculously, you know, simple. Um,
Right.
so I think sort of like all those elements kind of tie in as to why maybe like a developer might, you know, choose to go on Polygon from like a more
Right.
technical standpoint.
Right. And you know, earlier, speaking of the multi-chain ecosystem, could you expand on that and why that aspect makes Polygon Matic so special, especially when creating games and perhaps scaling those games up?
Well, I think, you know, when you're creating a game, you should kind of have the choice to be on any blockchain that you wish
Right.
so desire to be on. And also, I think it's like such early days, like it's like very early days right now that it's like, you know, getting people in the space is kind of like the number one kind of goal here. I mean, if you look at the number of like Web2 gamers, you can't compare that to the number of Web3 gamers right now. Like
Right.
I think even I don't even know like what the actual number is, but it's a huge, huge difference. And I'm actually curious to find that out after this call. But so getting gamers to come to Web3, maybe they're on one blockchain, but they're not like they hold a wallet from like one blockchain, but they don't the other. So like just getting them there already is pretty cool. Like that's one more gamer in Web3.
Yes.
But I think later on, it's yeah, I think everyone should have the choice to be on whichever blockchain that they want, and the goal here is just to like grow the space at this point, you know, like just like having quality games. Like I think because the biggest complaint that people kind of joke around with Web3 gaming is that the quality is so but I
Right.
think, you know, with the games coming through right now and with the AAA studios going into Web3, I think that notion is going to change very, very fast. I mean, obviously, it does take a lot of time to produce a quality game. It's not a 3 month project. It's, you know, a
Right.
1 year and a half, 2 year and beyond kind of project. But like the fact that AAA studios are looking into Web3 is a huge sign of confidence that the
Absolutely.
quality of the games are getting better. And with AAA studios, obviously you have the users that, you know, are very loyal to the games that they've previously produced. And now you're saying, well, the next game, you know, is going to be on Polygon. And all of a sudden there's, you know, gamers from Web2 that are incentivized to sort of make that leap. So the goal here is to grow as an ecosystem.
Wonderful. And you mentioned tools before. So let's say, for example, a viewer, you know, enjoying this episode right now is very excited about, you know, what she or he is hearing right now. I want to start building some decentralized dApps, Web3 games right now. What are, where do I start? Like if that person was to ask you, where do I start? And you mentioned some of the kind of the standout tools and features. Um, what would you highlight? And what would you suggest? And how would you kind of, I guess you could say, explain that?
So the really good news is that if you have ever developed on Ethereum, there is, you know, the language for Ethereum is Solidity, and it also happens to be the same language for Polygon as well because we're a layer two on Ethereum. So if and also if you have like no coding skills at all, I mean, if you learn Solidity, like like not only does that make you an Ethereum developer, but that kind of also makes you a Polygon developer by
There you go.
association,
Right.
just because we are EVM
Yeah.
compatible. And the cool thing, so like we kind of mentioned this in the beginning, like as like Ethereum being kind of like the mothership of all blockchains, is that I mean it's existed, you know, I think since 2014. So
Yeah.
like that's like 100 years, like in terms of like crypto years.
Right.
And
That
so
is.
it's, you
Absolutely.
know, incredibly like long time, but
Mm,
more so than that, like a lot of people have been accustomed, you know, to the language of Ethereum. And so you have much more like more talent that's there and more resources that are meant to help you sort of navigate your way around, that developer language, and the tools that have been created, the libraries, the online courses around Solidity and, EVM. So already, that's available. And if anyone wants to do that, I mean, just like 2-3 hours a week, just to sort of get acquainted with the tools. I mean, everything is there. It's creating a basic game. I think there's like a lot of templates that have been done, that you could use as a reference as well. I'm
Right.
happy to actually provide some links after this call that maybe we can
Absolutely. That'd
just,
be wonderful.
yeah, I would really love to do that because it's insanely simple. It's
Yeah.
actually insanely simple, and the resources are there to essentially help anyone that is looking into that, to make that a bit easier for them.
Right. That would be perfect. Thank you. And I'm just curious too, because you're the Web3 gaming lead at Polygon. Do you get questions all the time, whether it's from family, friends, relatives? Like, okay, so what exactly is this space? Like the metaverse, Web3 gaming, like is this like virtual reality? Like, do you? I would imagine you're probably bombarded with all different types of like either straightforward or abstract philosophical questions about like this space and probably how to explain it, right?
Yeah, that's why I don't go out anymore. I just stay at home. Just stay at home.
Right.
Um, I think it's like
By the way, that was a
such an
perfect
honor,
answer too. That
honestly.
was great.
It's just like, but a lot of people are curious. I think it's like more confusion, but it's like really good because confusion kind of creates curiosity.
Right.
And I never try to explain it right away. I try to like, say enough for them to kind of want to like go home and like research this a bit more,
Right.
because obviously it's like much more tangible and like but for me, I
Right.
mean, it's a huge honor that, I get to be in a place where I'm kind of like that go-to friend. Like if you want to know about whatever, and even people like on LinkedIn, I'm not really active on Twitter, but like I don't think there's ever been one single person that I haven't replied to on like LinkedIn. If anyone, just like post your name and I'll like reply, but I doubt that there's anyone that I didn't like, um unless it's something like very like open-ended, like what is crypto, like I'll
Right.
probably like send the link to an article. But if it's like specifically about Web3 gaming, like 100%, because I think, you know getting people to come on the ecosystem, I think, is crucial.
Right.
And so, anyone that's in a similar position, whether like they're in Polygon or Solana, like the fact that they can actually get users to come and like onboard them, like by just, having that discussion with them, I think is huge. And if you're in that position, then you should, communicate and, share knowledge and information, because that travels as well, like to their friends. And
You know, Web3 gaming, the metaverse. What do you think is the next logical step in society? Do you think that we can pretty much gamify almost every one of our average everyday experiences? So, like, for example, like, going out into the metaverse and, like, let's say, complete my, uh, maybe complete my grocery shopping for the week, getting up, or at least, logging in like an extra hour, 2 hours early, some sort of tangible reward is kind of distributed from that. Do you think that's the next step as far as kind of the existence that we all live in?
I mean, it certainly seems to be the case. I think, it's not like possible like right now, like this second, but I think that's where we're headed. There is a need to sort of like recreate life in the most sort of like realistic way possible, and I think that's what's trying to be achieved. You're like, that's the goal. But we're not quite there yet. I mean, if you look at, like the certain metaverses, like we're not quite there yet. It's more so like a
Right.
roadmap of like where we want to be like in X years. But I think
Yes.
that's where we're headed. It's like to try to like recreate that reality in the virtual world as close as possible.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of great projects out there. I mean, there's even like a project that wants to do like mortgages on the metaverse, which is,
Yeah.
quite interesting, because like that is the next step, because land is becoming a lot more expensive, because there's a need for people, more so brands, I think, right now to like go and have their shops on the metaverse, and so like that real estate is becoming a lot more lucrative. So hence having companies come and say, hey, I want to do mortgages for the metaverse. So
Right.
there is a need for that, and I think what's really interesting is like working in a field where like all these sort of changes and like this evolution is kind of happening in real time. I can't necessarily comment on like how it's going to be in like 2 years, because I don't think anyone can. It's like more so looking at the trends, looking at the users and what they're kind of asking for, and then being able to provide that for them. But everything is happening in real time. Like,
Yeah. And
very
by the way,
difficult to make predictions at this point.
yeah, yeah, truly anything is possible at this point. And by the way, I really like the example you made before on our call with Monopoly. So let's say if we're talking about metaverse and mortgages and Monopoly. So imagine if, let's say, you and I are playing Monopoly, and maybe there's one or two other people, so to say. So let's say the earnings of the Monopoly money that essentially we win or acquire from that gaming experience, like you can segue that into metaverse real estate or metaverse mortgages. You can kind of become a land baron effectively in the metaverse, from, certain activities, like whether it is something like Monopoly or whether it's earnings from gaming and, or almost anything else.
Yeah, that would be possible. I mean, if there is a Monopoly version of Play to Earn, like those,
Wow. Yeah. That's going to be fun.
the
It's going to be
Monopoly
interesting.
money would be, yeah, I mean, I'm very curious, and I would actually play that because I always,
Me
like
too.
I was always that person that like wanted Monopoly. It's like, hey, well, I wish this was real, but
Right. That's
sadly
what,
not.
yeah.
So,
Same thing when I was a kid. I'd win and I have like all this colored Monopoly money. Like, only I could use this right now.
but that's actually fascinating because like I've personally observed this as well, like playing Monopoly and like observing my friends. You kind of get that high of like you actually want this, like
Yes.
oh, I'm so rich right now. Then you start getting a little bit aggressive with your friends, and like your tone changes because all of a sudden
Right.
but yeah, then you leave the table, and then there's no store that's gonna be like, hey, here's my $200 from Monopoly. Nah. So but having that, like those Monopoly dollars as tokens,
Right.
is a real thing. If, well, obviously it's like someone would have to buy the IP for Monopoly, or if Monopoly's ever
Sure.
thinking of
Yeah.
having that in Web3, and if they are, you know,
I would imagine somebody has probably already mentioned it there with whoever owns the IP because it's probably an excellent idea.
I mean, it's great, not just because it's Monopoly, but because everyone played Monopoly, or almost everyone has played Monopoly. So like,
Right.
coming to people and telling them that if there was a Monopoly version, and that like these, like you actually get to have a wallet, that if you win the game, then like those tokens would be transferred to your wallet, and then it is a real thing. Like that sort of
Right.
sensation that you had while playing Monopoly, is tangible because those rewards are real. um so yeah, I mean, if I think if like Monopoly does something like that, just because a lot of people have heard of Monopoly, I would imagine that it would take people that have never interacted with with Web3 to want to make that leap to Web3, just because like this is a real possible thing right now.
Right. And I like what you mentioned about winning Monopoly money and kind of the special feeling or thrill or that kind of winner's high from like winning that money. If I was to compare it to something, when I was a kid, if I would play chess and if I won, that's great. Like I feel good. Like, oh, there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of thought. But when you won Monopoly money, that's a totally different feeling. It's in your hand, it's in different colors. You can feel
Yeah.
it. And I would imagine in the metaverse, you're gonna have all these tokens, or let's say, NFTs even, because I would imagine like a Monopoly metaverse is gonna have all kinds of pieces and things. That is gonna bring a totally different level on top of that.
Yeah, this is what's really cool about the creators economy itself. Like there's no sort of end to the imagination. Like there's no limit to that. And to just touch on like that like feeling of Monopoly, it's because like it's gamified to a point where like if you actually do make it and you do win, like there's a sense of achievement that comes with
Right.
that, even if the rewards aren't exactly tangible. Like you don't get to put that money in your wallet, so to speak, but you're kind of really happy that you made it all like to this position, and you had to like fight off all of your friends, and
Right.
but so like kind of like the next level of that would be like having it as a Web3 game where like that sort of satisfaction would be also translated to material possession, that you guys can use or
Right.
sell or keep. Or so I think, yeah, I think it's interesting to see where the space will evolve. But I would also comment that getting like sort of like legacy Web2 IP into Web3 is
Oh,
going to be
yeah.
a very encouraging factor for gamers to make that leap to Web3, just because it's a sign of confidence, like that their favorite game or their favorite studio is kind of going into that territory.
Right. And speaking of monopoly, or the notion of monopoly rather, so I kind of have an abstract but relevant question regarding, the metaverse and the subject matter. Could there ever be a monopoly in the metaverse, particularly as to gaming? Like, could there ever be like a situation where essentially, if we have a model here, could the metaverse ever essentially be one country with just many different provinces or territories within it? Or do you think the metaverse will always be more like a solar system? There's pretty much going to be um, spread out planets and separate worlds. And yes, you can access them, but there's a little bit of distance. There's going to be a little bit of time, let's say hopping from planet to planet and whatnot. And, solar system is also seemingly, infinite as well. So, I mean, who really knows how long it truly is, or who knows really where the boundaries are, so to say. So I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Oh God. I mean, this kind of ties into like I would love to comment on this and like say yes or no, but like even I don't know.
Right.
Like just because it's like everything is happening in real time. Like all these projects are happening like in real time. And I think there's also it's okay that, the ecosystem is kind of figuring like just figuring this all out and like what it means to them, like from a cultural standpoint, from a gamer standpoint, like making like mistakes. It's still very early days, and then, seeing
Right.
where that like where this is all going. And I think the treat that we have here is that we're kind of able to witness that. But having that as a possibility, having like what you just described as a choice, and then seeing how users react to that, I think is equally as important. That it exists and it's there, and if it becomes really popular, then great, and if it's not, well, you know on to the next
Right.
thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But
And
just from like a
yes.
user, sorry to cut you off,
No, no, by all
just from
means.
a user
Continue.
perspective, I think what's really crucial is I think there's this notion right now that it's like making that leap to Web3, like from a gamer perspective, like there's not a lot of education out there, or maybe that's not accurate. There is education out there, but the fact that you kind of have to go through that to, learn how to buy NFTs or like learn how to interact with Web3 gaming is
Right.
certainly a barrier to entry. And I think what we're going to be seeing is, just facilitating the user onboarding process. So, allowing you to
Absolutely.
very easily exchange from, crypto to fiat, in such a way where it's seamless and you don't have to go on a decentralized exchange. I mean, asking someone to like know how to use like MetaMask, Uniswap, PancakeSwap, and then it's like, whoa, like, like I didn't sign up for this kind of thing, but just,
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
wrapping that up. It's not everyone.
Yeah.
Like I think crypto natives kind of assume that it's like, yeah, just, use MetaMask. And it's like, actually, I had my friend that was like, that thing that looks like a fox. I'm like, oh, you mean like MetaMask? It's like, what is that? And for me, that just kind of reaffirms that this person could very easily, because he is a very smart guy, like this person could be on Web3, but like the fact that like he's talking about the fox and he has no idea what the fox does kind of thing is really
Right.
funny, because I think that could very be easily solved by just having a much easier, like user onboarding process. And I think that's where it's headed. I mean, there's a lot more wallets right now that are very easy to use, and I think the end goal perhaps would be to onboard the user in such a way where they don't even feel like they're interacting with all these tools. Where like this is all happening in the back end. And there are
Right.
solutions for this like right now, but having that in Web3, for the bigger games and for the games, I think that's very important to sort of like lower the barrier to entry for the users, and just, make it easy and simple for everyone to come in on Web3 and play these games. So I think
Yeah.
that's going to be a central theme, like user, sort of like the user experience is going to become one of the main themes as well for 2022.
Right. And you mentioned a very interesting point earlier when it came to gamification and NFTs. So there is a notion out there with many with NFTs, and it's like, okay, this is a JPEG. Let's say if we're on the cynical side or the cynical crowd of when it comes to people and NFTs, this is a JPEG. What is the utility outside of this? Now with gamification and Web3, that essentially adds a utility to NFTs, especially as to the gaming ecosystem. Do you think NFTs, a lot of them that are out there, outside of gaming, I mean, are they running into the risk that more and more of the same is being kind of mass produced at this point? Because I'll even say, just anecdotally speaking, I feel like I've seen copy upon copy of certain things out there. And even me, I'm like, are we kind of running into like an NFT bubble or something like that, right now? Because it almost seems like to me, if we're going to get to the point where, let's say, the NFT phenomenon is going to become a bubble, and that bubble will pop eventually, so to say, is the next solution evolution? Shouldn't it be gaming? Like, I kind of wonder, especially kind of with like what I'm kind of seeing out there and just things I hear. Um, Wanted to know some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's, it's becoming harder and harder for anyone to have another NFT collection. And I think we kind of
Right,
spoke about this, like, what does that mean? Like another NFT collection, like kind of, something that's been copied, or there is no
right,
sort of like utility for, I mean, it can be like beyond gaming. I mean, if it's like a really good artist
right.
and sort of like this is their bread and butter, I mean, why not? Because this is actually what they do. But we've seen many projects out there that are kind of like copycat projects, or
Yes.
kind of like get rich quick schemes. But I think that's okay, or like that was okay, like even just to get people to like, have an
Yeah.
interest in it
Just get like a
in the
broader
first
buy-in
place.
from people. Yeah.
But I think, it's getting much more challenging, a lot more challenging right now, just because it's very saturated. There's a lot more marketplaces. The expectations are higher. People are looking for utility, so like they are starting to question that, sort of like, if I have this, so if it's a really good artist, well, I get to have ownership, of that artist's work. So that's
Right.
totally fine. But on the gaming perspective, like that utility is there, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're speculating to buy that NFT because it's going to increase in value. It might just be that you want it in that game, like to have it as an asset in that game. And I think this is kind of where we're headed right now, where like that utility is beyond sort of like that investor approach of like, I'm buying this because it might 100x,
Right.
at some point. But I think more so right now, it's, having that utility, having that value, and
Yeah.
having, buying it because you actually want to use it in the game, and like you don't really care if it's gonna 100x or not.
Right. Because you know what kind of comes to mind, and I'm starting to hear and see some more of this out there. Like, are NFTs running into the problem where there's just going to be kind of more pump and dump? So, like, copies upon copies, hoping something 25x's or 100x's, something like that. I kind of wonder, is that just going to kind of enable that environment, much more? And then I think of gaming, and I've played, platforms like Axie and, similar things like that before. And, I never left that experience feeling like, okay, I just did something redundant. No, like, whether it's like items, whether it's like you could say NFT type objects that you acquire or win in that world, everything kind of has meaning in gaming. Whatever game you're using, this item, this NFT is useful for this context or this situation. And kind of like what you're saying with a lot of these kind of collections, um, it's kind of going to the situation. What is the use going to be if not for a quick buck or something like that?
Yeah, actually, you mentioned something very interesting, which is like, a lot of these rug pulls that are going on, and like people and like anonymous teams kind of like exploiting that. What's really interesting about the space right now is that the element of accountability. So running KYC on the teams that have, certain projects. So back in the days of like ICOs, it was a very anonymous process, like
Right.
you didn't necessarily need to know who the team was. It was just, another big project that was coming and that was going to make all these differences and, super cool, but there was no accountability. But I think IDOs kind of solved that. So like initial DEX offerings, where
Yes.
in order to be on the IDO, there is a KYC process that's done on the team and on the project itself, just to make sure that their users are not affected by this, and that if they are affected by this, then whoever did that is accountable.
Right.
Like making it to the top IDOs as well, it's like it's kind of reassuring for the users that they're kind of interacting with credible projects.
Right.
um, for NFTs, I mean, I don't think marketplaces have started doing KYC per se, like on the creators, but
Yeah, that's
it
actually a
might
good
be the
point.
case at
Yeah.
some point.
Right. Yeah. I don't think there's any type of like streamlined process or procedure as far as KYC and the creators for some of these things. A lot of these things kind of just exist in like Discords and Telegram channels and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a very that's a very good point.
Yeah,
And
and I
by the
think
way,
having
yes,
sorry,
no, continue, please.
having that KYC as well on creators, I think that would kind of limit, I mean, content. So like there is sort of like that argument of, it's Web3, it's decentralized, anonymity should always be a solution. Sorry, like should always be there, because of the nature of the space as a whole. But,
Yes.
also having that KYC process would, you wouldn't have as many creators out there. I mean, like there's some people that do want to stay anonymous, but I think from a user perspective, sort of like when you're buying something from someone, that it is in fact that person, and that if anything happens that you wouldn't want to happen, that there is kind of like an accountability. Like there's no customer service like with Web3. Like it's not like you're going to call like
Right. Yeah.
Polygon,
There's not an 800
or
number per
I mean,
se. Yeah.
Polygon might actually answer you, but if you
Right.
call, like OpenSea and be like, hey, I mean, that's actually interesting because
Right.
like the idea of accountability, I think, will become a lot more prominent, and especially like if you look at regulation right now, it is very like volatile. I mean, if you look at different jurisdictions, every jurisdiction sort of has like its own way of doing things. So
Right.
even that will play a factor into like how the space is going to be evolving.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at Web2 traditionally, you know, once you're accepting transactions from anyone, there's always that process of like KYC. So I don't know if that's going to be like a thing in this space, but the fact that we have IDOs and people are okay with KYC is certainly a sign that it might be the case, or maybe a hybrid of that, in the
Right.
near future.
Wonderfully put. And on an ending note, for anybody who wants to get started in Web3 gaming and they're looking at Polygon, what advice would you give to anybody who, let's say, A, they're just entering the blockchain space, B, they just want to build a game, C, a little bit of both. They just want to experience Web3 gaming, they want to know more about blockchain. How do they start? Or what advice would you give people when they kind of start this journey into, the metaverse, so to say?
So it's already great that you're interested in learning more about the space. And what's really cool right now, there's just so much information out there that, no one can possibly keep up with everything that's going on in like crypto land.
Right.
But, even engaging in that interest, a bunch of articles, are out there that really explain, for example, what, for example, NFTs are. So just kind of like getting your hands dirty with like what's already available out there, and having that curiosity. I think anyone that has that curiosity and actually goes and tries to like discover is like ultimately like led into like this like rabbit hole of I
Right.
can't stop anymore kind of thing. Like I haven't seen a
Yeah.
lot of people that like started looking into Web3 that said, oh, this is not for me. It's more like I came in with like 3 questions and I thought I was gonna find some answers, but now I just, left with like 100 questions, which is
Right.
good because those questions are what are gonna lead you to find out more about the space. So yeah, I would definitely say like, start by joining, a cool YouTube channel that kind of explains things and how they go on, like literally go on the protocols and read about them. There's usually a lot of information. white papers, roadmaps. So I would start like more on the literature front just to figure out what
Right.
everything is. Um, yeah, and then start by getting a wallet. You know,
Right.
even if you don't want to necessarily buy any NFTs or any digital assets, but just figuring out how that works because it is kind of like a central piece to the environment right now. Yeah, follow people that talk about this space. I think even just being indirectly exposed to some of the information that goes out there is does help long term, and it's better than nothing.
Right.
And yeah, so there's go on the marketplaces, look at the collections, and then maybe like try to figure out like why is this collection, so hyped, and then maybe then I think like all these different things can like lead you to figure out more about the space in general, but
Yeah.
interacting with it is it's actually like insanely simple if, someone actually has the drive to figure out how it works, and there's no going back after that.
Solid advice and very well put. I've always been a fan of Polygon. I've been very impressed with its capabilities and possibilities in the space. And I have to say, I think I'm going to start trying to build my own type of Web3 game now and see where I can go with that. Soufia, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. You explained all of these concepts well. I would say anybody who is just learning about this space now, I think they have a good primer and an outline to go about figuring out what exactly they like and what direction they want to go in this space. So, Soufia, again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having you, come back on and perhaps co-host an episode or two together and further expand on Web3 gaming and the metaverse and see where this will be going in 2022. Anything is possible. Anything can happen. I mean, with all the chaos that's going on today, there's also a tremendous amount of possibilities, especially in this space.
Yeah, that would be super dope. I mean, if I was able to convince even like one person to go and try to interact with Web3, like that was the goal for today, for sure.
Well, I'll tell you this.
Yeah, I'm
I
super
think it's
happy
mission
for it.
accomplished.
Well, if anyone did have that curiosity, like leave a message on on Adam's LinkedIn, and I would be very happy to see that. I mean, it's very reassuring that we are able to sort of like get to like interact with the community. I think it's really important to even have this channel, Adam, where you
Oh,
can
thank you.
actually reach people, and even people that haven't heard about the space, or just have an hour to even hear about what's going on. I think it's really great that this is a possibility, and super excited to come back and talk about gaming. And maybe next time we can have questions from the people that watched today's episode, and I would be
Yeah,
super
absolutely.
excited to.
We can do something like that. Have live questions coming in and answer it as we are speaking. And I have to highlight this. I'm very grateful and thankful for guests such as yourself and all the other guests who've been on the show, Crypto with English. It is very very rewarding and kind for guests to volunteer and share their time to explain all of these nuances and minutia about blockchain in really a very pleasant, casual, conversational, type of way. That's really what makes the show kind of work. It's kind of the magic in the engine here, so to say. So, I'm very happy and grateful and appreciative of that, to say the very least.
Yeah, and thank you for letting me interact with your community. Again, I'm super excited to also see your other episodes. I think it's a really
Yes.
cool initiative, and
Well, thank you.
getting to watch this space in real time. So thank you for having me.
Yes, likewise. And everybody, be sure to check out this episode on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and to be candid, it's on all the other major platforms as well. So stay tuned and check it out. And be sure to DM me, send me messages about this episode. Any questions, any suggestions, any ideas, or maybe some of your thoughts and reflections about today, too. So, anyway, Soufia, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Take